No one in the United Kingdom, absolutely no one, ever imagined they would see such a thing unfold before their very eyes. The country awoke in shock, as if struck directly at the heart of British tradition itself. Because when King Charles broke his silence with a cold, calculated and cutting move, it was not just an institutional message. It was a warning laden with centuries of authority, as if the Crown itself had decided to rein in a government that had lost all control. And, my friend, when the castle speaks, Westminster trembles. What has unfolded in the past hours is not ordinary politics. It is crisis. It is rupture. It is the kind of moment history books describe as the day everything changed. And what angers the people most, especially those who have always stood for tradition, order, and respect, is that Starmer, instead of showing humility, chose to double down, embrace arrogance, and challenge the one symbol still holding national stability together. That is why today, across the country, veterans, pensioners, workers, and patriots repeat the same phrase: enough. Now he has gone too far. And the line was crossed in the worst possible way. Insider sources describe that, at the exact moment Starmer received the King's message, demanding immediate correction, the Prime Minister simply froze, pale, silent, as if he knew he had awakened something no sensible leader would dare provoke. But within seconds, shock turned to fury. Witnesses report he crumpled the document so violently it seemed he wanted to crush the monarch himself with his bare hands. Then came the words that sent a chill through every aide present. "I will not be told what to do by him, by anyone." The statement echoed in the room like an unspeakable political sin, not just for defying the Crown, but for doing so at a time when the country was already fragile, divided, and exhausted. And it is this explosive combination, arrogance, tension, and instability, that is pushing the UK towards its greatest constitutional abyss in decades. Because when a Prime Minister loses emotional control in the face of supreme authority, the people feel it, the monarchy reacts, and the entire nation holds its breath. It was in this atmosphere of suspended breath that Westminster erupted into pure combustion. The King's message, short, direct, impossible to ignore, ripped through corridors, offices, and committee rooms like a shockwave. Ministers who had once defended Starmer tooth and nail suddenly began avoiding interviews, cancelling engagements, vanishing from events. Not because they had changed their minds, but because they smelled the unmistakable stench of terminal crisis, that political odor only veterans recognize, the scent of imminent downfall. And as the government shrank back, the opposition and conservatives fell silent. But not out of respect. They fell silent because they realized they did not need to lift a finger to watch the Prime Minister self-destruct in public. And for thousands of Britons watching this implosion in real time, the feeling was the same. Finally, someone has put Starmer in his place. The tension became almost physical, heavy, suffocating, as if any word spoken in the wrong corridor could light the fuse on a powder keg already overflowing. But the real spark came when the confrontation stopped being merely institutional and became personal. Live on national television. During a routine interview, the kind that usually merits no more than a footnote, a journalist asked Starmer about the King's message. And there, in that instant, before millions of viewers, the Prime Minister made the mistake his own allies now call the moment that sealed his fate. Instead of responding with diplomacy, calm, or respect, Starmer exploded. The monarchy does not dictate to the government. Not now, not ever. It was a symbolic slap in the face of tradition, of history, and, for many Britons, of the country's very identity. The public was stunned. Comments flooded the internet. Analysts, even those aligned with the left, were left reeling. That statement was not just a slip, it was a declaration of political war against the UK's most stable institution. And the UK, especially the over-45s, the patriotic, the conservative, and those weary of progressive arrogance, reacted like a nation that had just seen its red line crossed. From that moment, the crisis ceased to be merely political and became something far deeper, a battle for the very soul of the country. Inside Parliament, veteran MPs, people who had survived scandals, internal wars, traumatic referendums, and brutal economic crises, watched the replay of Starmer's words with expressions of pure astonishment. Some shook their heads, others covered their faces, and a few muttered that they had never seen anything like it. With each replay, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if everyone simultaneously understood that something irreversible had just occurred. It was like watching the UK step through a historical portal, the kind that leaves permanent scars. And for the older, traditionalist public, who had grown up seeing the monarchy as a pillar of stability, watching the Prime Minister defy the crown was not just audacity. It was an assault on the country. And when that public feels attacked, the response is predictable: total outrage. Meanwhile, across the river at Buckingham Palace, the mood was one of silent storm. Aides rushed about, emergency meetings were called without warning, documents were reviewed, discarded, rewritten, all in absolute secrecy. The king, according to insider accounts, did not need to raise his voice. His posture, his silence, his calculated gaze, that was enough to communicate that the line had been crossed. And the longer the king's silence stretched, the heavier it became, pressing down on Downing Street like an invisible hand. It was the kind of silence that screams without making a sound. At the heart of government, this silence provoked panic. Frantic messages, WhatsApp groups splitting apart, ministers discreetly distancing themselves, and aides fearing even to answer the phone. The feeling was clear. The palace was about to act, and when it does, no government survives intact. It was in this atmosphere of mounting fear that the Labour Party began to fracture from within. Sue Gray, known for her icy discipline, reportedly told colleagues that Starmer had lost control of the narrative, the room, and perhaps even his own sanity. The remark spread through the corridors like a forbidden whisper. Suddenly, groups of ministers began gathering in quiet corners, speaking in hushed tones, barely audible. A silent but devastating movement took shape, deleting old tweets of support for Starmer, drafting resignation letters, rehearsing statements of strategic distance. Nothing was said openly, but everything was screamed between the lines. And for the patriotic public, those who see the left as weak, opportunistic, and disloyal, seeing Starmer's own party abandon ship only reinforced a certainty echoing through British homes. He is not up to the job. But the most devastating blow did not come from the opposition, the press, or the streets. It came from within the palace itself. A carefully orchestrated leak revealed that the king believed Starmer had compromised the stability of the constitutional relationship and undermined the dignity of the office. These words fell on Westminster like an institutional nuclear bomb. It was not just criticism, it was not just disapproval. It was the kind of statement that, when made by a monarch, carries enough weight to topple entire governments. The right rejoiced. Reform UK celebrated openly. Farage declared that the country has finally woken up. And the Conservatives saw the golden opportunity they had waited years for, watching Starmer destroy himself without lifting a finger. For the over-45s, tired of politicians attacking traditions and weakening British values, This moment was like seeing historical justice finally restored. And let me ask you something now, quickly, but it makes all the difference in ensuring the truth reaches more Britons who are tired of this mess. If you are following along, click subscribe and leave a like. This helps the video reach even more people who, like you, want to see the UK respected, the Crown preserved, and this crisis exposed without censorship. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and strong. So hit that button and let's see this explosive story through to the end together. And as the country seethed, Starmer did the exact opposite of what any balanced leader would do in the face of an institutional earthquake. He doubled down. Closed meetings, locked doors, tense aides, and at the center of it all, the Prime Minister repeating the same phrase that left his own allies in a state of panic. If I back down, I'll be seen as weak. If I push forward, I'll be seen as dangerous. So let them talk. It was pride speaking louder than reason. It was stubbornness replacing prudence. And to a whole country watching from afar, it seemed Starmer was no longer governing. He was reacting, impulsive, emotional, blind to the abyss before him. Polls began to leak quietly, approval plummeting, confidence evaporating, support melting like ice in the sun. This was no longer a political crisis. It was freefall, and in British politics, freefall does not end on the ground. It ends in the job. As the early hours advanced, London's atmosphere shifted. Newspapers updated headlines every 20 minutes. Reporters camped outside Downing Street. Aides came and went, clutching folders, phones, cups of coffee trembling in their hands. And in every corner of Westminster, a phrase echoed like a dark omen. Something is going to happen before dawn. It was not paranoia. It was sharp political instinct. When the monarchy moves, the government feels it. And when the government feels it, the whole system shakes. The UK, which has faced wars, economic collapses, and diplomatic crises, now found itself in something different. The fear that the relationship between King and Prime Minister was on the brink of an unprecedented rupture. For the over 45s, who value stability, order, and respect for tradition, this sounded like confirmation of a long-held suspicion. Starmer was leading the country into chaos. Then, as the country still struggled to grasp the scale of the crisis, came the signal many feared, and others, silently, had hoped for. Sources close to the palace confirmed that the king had called an emergency meeting with his most experienced constitutional advisor. People only summoned in extreme moments when the stability of the state is at real risk. The session lasted hours, doors closed, lights on long after dawn, no smiles, no comments, no informality. The kind of atmosphere even veteran staff describe as too heavy to ignore. Inside, the king was reportedly presented with 3 scenarios: a public message, a private demand, or the nuclear option, the most feared, the rarest, the one that could completely redraw the country's leadership. And the mere mention of this possibility made even the most seasoned monarchists admit that the UK had entered uncharted territory in its own history. Dawn arrived, but brought no relief. On the contrary, it brought the final snap that turned tension into explosion. Suddenly, like a bolt of lightning through the news, came confirmation. Buckingham Palace had issued a mandatory invitation to the Prime Minister. This was not a suggestion. This was not courtesy. It was a formal summons, the kind no leader would dare ignore. Westminster erupted into hysteria. Journalists ran, ministers paled, the opposition celebrated quietly. And inside Downing Street, reports describe pure panic. The door to Starmer's office was reportedly slammed so hard the frame cracked. It was the perfect symptom of a government that had lost its way, and now had to face the one man who could still decide its fate. For the over 45s, who see the crown as the last bastion of order against progressive turmoil, this moment represented something clear: the beginning of the reckoning. The journey to the palace was described as one of the tensest in recent British political history. The car moved through streets still damp from the early hours, but inside reigned an eerie silence. Aides report that Starmer did not blink, did not move, did not say a word, just stared into the void like someone about to face his own judgment. One claimed to have heard the Prime Minister murmur, almost inaudibly, "They cannot tell me how to govern." Another said he repeated softly, "I will not yield." But the truth was that resistance sounded less like courage and more like desperation. When the vehicle arrived at the palace gates, there was no red carpet, no ceremonial greeting, no protocol. Starmer was led through a side entrance, discreet, reserved for moments requiring absolute seriousness. It was the definitive sign that this was not a meeting. It was an ultimatum, and every step taken down that cold corridor echoed as if the whole country was listening. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? I want to know which part of the UK or the world is following this historic crisis with us. Knowing where you are helps me understand how this outrage is spreading across the country. And behind closed doors, the final confrontation took place. Insider sources say the king opened the conversation with a tone so cold, so firm, and so direct that Starmer was simply not prepared. Charles did not shout, did not threaten, did not waver. He merely reminded the Prime Minister, with the authority of centuries, that his actions were destabilizing the nation and that this had to end. The words fell like hammer blows on marble. Starmer, cornered, lost his composure and raised his voice in a desperate act that left even the palace's councillors motionless outside. And then, they say, he said something that crossed all lines, something too grave to be revealed in full. The result was immediate. Starmer left the palace pale, trembling, not answering a single reporter. And as he disappeared into the car, the king remained seated, calm, unmoving, like someone who already knows the next chapter no longer belongs to the government. It belongs to history. Now, Westminster is in tatters. A vote of no confidence gains momentum by the minute. Ministers prepare emergency statements, and the whole country watches, stunned, at the real possibility of seeing a government fall not at the hands of the opposition, but of the crown itself. For many Britons, especially the most patriotic and traditional, it is simple. Starmer crossed the line. And when you challenge the crown responds.